Imagine a world where two vastly different cultures, separated by oceans and worlds of experience, suddenly collide in a distant, unexplored land. On one side, you have the Vikings, fierce warriors and explorers who had sailed the farthest reaches of Europe, driven by a thirst for new lands, resources, and conquest. On the other side, you have the Native Americans, inhabitants of North America for thousands of years, deeply connected to the land and skilled in survival in environments the Norse could barely begin to comprehend. What would happen when these two worlds met on the shores of North America around the year 1000 AD? Could these encounters have changed history? Could a battle of such epic proportions have occurred, where Viking steel met the bows and arrows of Native American warriors? While these questions spark the imagination, history gives us some clues about what really happened during these fateful encounters between the Vikings and Native Americans. What we know about these meetings comes mainly from the Viking sagas, oral traditions passed down for generations and eventually written into texts such as the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. These sagas tell the tale of the Norse voyages to a land they called Vinland, believed to be located in present-day Newfoundland, Canada. While Vinland was a land rich in resources, it was not uninhabited, and the stories reveal how the Norse came into conflict with the Native Americans, whom they referred to as Skrælings. The Viking era was marked by unprecedented exploration, not just in Europe but also across the North Atlantic. By the late 10th century, Norse settlers had already established colonies in Iceland and Greenland. It was from these Greenlandic settlements that the Vikings set out on one of their most ambitious voyages, an attempt to settle in what they believed to be a new, unexplored land. Leif Erikson, the son of the famous Viking leader Eric the Red, is credited with leading the first expedition to North America. According to the sagas, around the year 1000 AD, Leif and his crew sailed west from Greenland and made landfall in three distinct areas: Helgeland, Markland, and Vinland. These locations likely correspond to modern-day Baffin Island, Labrador, and Newfoundland, respectively. The sagas describe it as a land of great abundance, with plentiful resources like timber, wild grapes, and rich farmland, resources that were in short supply in the harsh environments of Iceland and Greenland. Encouraged by this wealth of resources, the Vikings established a small settlement in Vinland, likely near what is now L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland. But what began as a hopeful attempt to expand Norse influence soon turned into a struggle for survival. While the Vikings were no strangers to hostile encounters, their previous conquests in Europe had primarily been against other Europeans, who shared similar weaponry, tactics, and knowledge. In North America, however, the Vikings encountered an entirely different culture. The indigenous peoples of North America, likely the ancestors of the Beothuk or Mi'kmaq tribes. The sagas describe the Native Americans as Skrælings, a term that some historians believe could have meant barbarians or small people in Old Norse, though the exact meaning is unclear. The Vikings initially made peaceful contact with the Native Americans, engaging in trade with them. The Norse offered goods such as cloth and milk, while the indigenous people traded animal skins and furs. For a brief moment, it seemed that the two groups could coexist, united by the exchange of valuable resources. However, tensions soon arose. One of the earliest recorded skirmishes between the Vikings and Native Americans occurred when a group of Norse settlers tried to trade red cloth with the indigenous people. A misunderstanding over the value or distribution of the cloth led to a confrontation. The Native Americans, unfamiliar with the Vikings' aggressive tactics, retaliated, and the first violent clash between the two groups took place. The most famous of the battles between the Vikings and the Native Americans occurred during the Second Norse expedition to Vinland, led by Thorvald Erikson, Leif's brother. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, Thorvald was exploring the coastline when his crew encountered a group of Native Americans. Initially, the Vikings attacked, killing several Native Americans, but one survivor escaped and returned with reinforcements. What followed was a brutal and chaotic battle. The Native Americans launched a surprise attack on the Vikings, using bows and arrows to strike from a distance. The Vikings, who were more accustomed to hand-to-hand combat with swords and shields, struggled to defend themselves. Thorvald, while attempting to rally his men, was struck by an arrow and later died from his wounds. His death was a turning point in the conflict, and the Vikings, recognizing the strength and numbers of their opponents, retreated. This battle demonstrated a key difference in warfare between the two cultures. The Native Americans had the advantage of knowing the terrain and employing guerrilla tactics, while the Vikings, who were fewer in number and heavily reliant on European-style combat, found themselves overwhelmed. The indigenous people's ability to attack swiftly and retreat into the forest proved to be an effective strategy against the Vikings, who were unused to this type of warfare. Despite the initial clash, the Vikings did not give up their attempts to establish a presence in Vinland. However, their continued encounters with the Native Americans were marked by hostility. The saga of Erik the Red mentions another battle in which the Vikings were attacked while they were sleeping in their settlement. The Native Americans, possibly aware of the Norse settlers' weaknesses, launched a surprise nighttime raid. The Vikings were caught off guard and, after a fierce battle, managed to drive off the attackers, but the cost was high. Several Norse settlers were killed or wounded in the attack, and the remaining settlers were left to wonder if they could survive in such a hostile environment. Another account tells of how the Vikings attempted to fortify their settlement, but even with fortifications, they found it difficult to fend off the increasingly aggressive Native American forces. The Vikings were simply too few in number to defend their colony effectively, and they lacked reinforcements from Greenland or Iceland, which were too far away to provide timely support. Given the challenges they faced, the Vikings eventually decided to abandon Vinland. The saga of the Greenlanders suggests that the Norse realized they could not maintain a permanent settlement in the face of ongoing conflict with the Native Americans. The indigenous peoples, skilled in the art of guerrilla warfare and intimately familiar with the land, made it clear that they would not tolerate a foreign presence on their territory. The decision to abandon Vinland was likely influenced by several factors. First, the Vikings were outnumbered. While the Native American population in the region was relatively small compared to later centuries, it was still larger than the Viking expeditionary force. The Norse, with only a few ships and limited manpower, could not hope to compete with the native forces on equal terms. Second, the Vikings lacked the resources to sustain long-term conflict. The North Atlantic was a dangerous and unpredictable environment, and maintaining a supply line between Greenland and Vinland was difficult, if not impossible, especially during the winter months. Without consistent supplies of food, weapons, and reinforcements, the Norse settlers were left vulnerable. Third, the Native Americans proved to be formidable opponents. Although the Vikings were known for their prowess in battle, they were more accustomed to fighting other Europeans, who used similar tactics and weapons. The Native Americans' use of bows and arrows, combined with their ability to move swiftly through the dense forests and launch surprise attacks, made them difficult foes for the Vikings to defeat. By the early 11th century, the Viking expeditions to Vinland had come to an end. The Norse settlers abandoned their outpost, leaving behind few traces of their presence. For centuries, the story of the Viking voyages to North America was largely forgotten, preserved only in the sagas and oral traditions of the Norse people. It wasn't until the 1960s that archaeological evidence confirmed the existence of a Viking settlement in North America. The discovery of L'Anse aux Meadows in Newfoundland provided concrete proof that the Vikings had indeed reached the New World long before Columbus. This settlement, with its characteristic Norse-style buildings and artifacts, stands as a testament to the Viking exploration of North America and their brief but significant encounters with the Native Americans. The legacy of these encounters is a reminder of the complexity of early exploration and colonization. While the Vikings were among the first Europeans to set foot in North America, their attempts to establish a foothold were ultimately unsuccessful, in large part due to the resilience of the indigenous peoples who lived there. The Native Americans, though they lacked the advanced technology of the Vikings, used their knowledge of the land and their unique fighting styles to protect their territories from these foreign invaders. The Viking Native American encounters in Vinland offer a fascinating glimpse into a moment when two worlds collided. These small but significant skirmishes between Viking explorers and Native American warriors may not have altered the course of history on a grand scale, but they represent one of the earliest instances of European Native American conflict. In the end, the Norse were forced to abandon their dreams of colonizing North America, not because of their weakness but because of the strength and resilience of the Native Americans who defended their land. The sagas, which blend history and myth, give us a window into this incredible chapter of exploration, warfare, and survival. It's a story of